Hello again, Marty Braden here, continuing with my review of each of the chapters and the topics covered in An Atheist Delusion, which, by the way, is my book right here. See the book? And the answers I gave to Richard Dawkins' atheist arguments he put forth in his book, The God Delusion, right here. It's a pretty big book, too. All in an effort to prove God's non-existence. I'm going to share some thoughts from An Atheist Delusion's introduction that I give before going on to discuss and give my response to Richard Dawkins' arguments found in the 10 chapters that he wrote on many topics. As I mentioned in my last video, I'm a lifelong average member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is more commonly known as the Mormon Church. And Richard Dawkins is a world-renowned evolutionary biologist and atheist who wrote The God Delusion. I'm certainly not world-renowned. Over the past 2.5 years, I wrote my book and finally just recently published it. In the first of the series of video reviews that I'll be doing for this channel, I give the preface. I just read the preface and then I go on from there, just as an introduction. Today I will be reviewing the introduction portion of my book. It is quite lengthy, and so I will have to break it up into short 15-minute videos so that I can not end up boring you to death. I am hopeful that you will be inspired and motivated to jump on to the comment section and share any thoughts that you might have as you've been listening to or as you listen to my story and the reasons I have for having come to this point where I had to write this book, and to be able to review with you the evidence that I'm going to give you as you begin this journey together with me. So let's go ahead and begin, and let's get into that introduction. It says, An Atheist Delusion, a Latter-day Saints perspective on Richard Dawkins' anti-theist, anti-Christ book, The God Delusion. An introduction. I begin by saying Colossians 2, 8 through 10 in the King James Version. It's an epistle written by the Apostle Paul while serving with his young companion Timothy. Beware, lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, and after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. For in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and ye are complete in him, which is the head of all principality and power. After reading Mr. Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, even though Richard himself admits in his book that, quote, he did not and cannot prove that God doesn't exist, end quote, nor can I prove that God doesn't exist with absolute, irrefutable, incontrovertible evidence, I still decided to share my Latter-day Saint perspective on Richard's atheistic, anti-theist, anti-Christ arguments that he put forth in his book to show there's more than enough evidence to move one's belief cursor wherever it currently sits on the Dawkins percentage of probability spectrum relating to the God does not exist question, several percentage points beyond the 50-50 stalemate marker and nearly over to the 100% God exists. That's my goal. At the heart of the contemporary debate between God and science, which has been raging on for a very long time, there are still several important unanswered questions. They're called the big questions. But before we even consider those questions, let me give my personal perspective, its conclusion to you, my readers, right from the beginning of my book. To me, this debate boils down to the fact that every individual I've ever known appears to have chosen what they want to believe concerning the does God exist question. In other words, they choose to believe the evidence provided by one of two worldviews, atheism or theism, because they want to believe the evidence presented by the side they want to believe in and the side that feels the most comfortable to them, and not because the evidence itself is incontrovertible. For, as I just stated, there is no incontrovertible evidence on either side of this debate for or against God's existence. I decided to put my conclusion right at the beginning of my book because the reality is that both sides have a great deal of well-informed, highly endorsed evidence supporting their worldview. And anything Richard or I put forth as evidence is not incontrovertible. And so it leaves all of us having to choose to believe or choose not to believe in God's existence. The rest of my book covers my arguments from a Latter-day Saint perspective in response to Richard's atheistic arguments and interpretations. I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as I said, and I sincerely hope as you come along this deep thought-provoking journey with me, you will enjoy the ride and even feel that it was well worth the price of admission, the precious time you'll invest in yourself by reading it. I'm confident you'll find it not only to be interesting and informative, but you'll find it to be a transformational experience. At least that's my hope. Richard Dawkins has chosen to believe the evidence offered up by like-minded proponents of the worldview of atheism, the belief that God does not exist. That, however, is just his opinion, of course. Richard says, quote, the evidence for God's non-existence reaches a probability percentage of more than 50%, end quote. However, I believe that you, my readers, will come to realize, as I did, that Richard simply wants to believe his delusion, an atheist delusion. My perspective of the God delusion will clearly explain why I believe this to be a true observation of Richard and most everybody else that I have met who say they're atheist. It is also true that I have chosen to believe the evidence that my worldview, theism, offers up, and it's as well as my experiential and epistemic evidence I have collected from my multiplicity of sources, including from the three divine beings we'll be discussing throughout my book. I believe it substantiates God's existence. For me, the entirety of this evidence gives me license to declare that God's existence has a percentage of probability that's much more than just 50%. In fact, I believe the spectrum's percentage of probability that says God exists is as high as 100%. But you, my readers, will determine where your own belief cursor sits on this percentage of probability spectrum once you finish reading my book. Just like Richard's worldview, my worldview boils down to the fact that I want to believe and do believe my well-informed and highly endorsed evidence that I have collected over my lifetime of more than 68 years. I just cannot deny him, nor would I. Richard, of course, disagrees and says the God hypothesis is very close to being ruled out by the laws of probability, end quote. Well, we shall see. The bottom line for me, and it's a fact, is that neither the atheist scientist nor the theist scientist, or anyone else for that matter, have come forth with any kind of absolute, irrefutable, incontrovertible scientific proof to support their claim of God's existence or his non-existence. And that's what makes this debate so emotionally conflicting, as well as intellectually and spiritually challenging for those of us who have joined in the debate. That said, recent scientific discoveries are exposing God's handiwork. After reviewing all the evidence, each of you, my readers, or my viewers, will be given the opportunity to make this very, very important choice for yourselves. I suggest that you do not make it lightly. What makes you choose one view or stack of evidence over the other side's view and stack of evidence, or what makes you want to believe one view is truer than the opposite side's view, I believe, will be your worldview and how serious and honest you are as you search for acceptable answers to all of the big questions of life. That said, the purpose of my rebuttal's perspective to Richard's book is put forth a unique, alternative, a Latter-day Saints perspective to Richard's atheistic views. As I said, I will show that there's far more evidence for the probability of God's existence than just the 50-50 draw. In fact, as I just said, my well-informed, highly endorsed reference legs of evidence that I'm compiled for you, my readers, will show that the percentage of probability for God's existence is actually growing every single day. And much of this evidence that I believe is revealing God's existence even more reliably is coming forth from the other side of theism, the camp of atheist scientists, and their more recent discoveries on life and cells. Oh, it's mind-blowing. Today's new atheistic scientists claim to have the upper hand on the issue of God's existence. But as a Latter-day Saint and someone who believes in a living, personal, corporeal God, I must protest that claim. I'm doing what I feel I can and should do to help all believers in God's existence to understand that they need not concede to these clever antagonists and their unproven claims that they're constantly barking out at believers in God. In some cases, they are barking outright lies or at least designed manipulations. These antichrists work so very hard to distort the so-called facts of science in order to tilt them in their favor. And even worse, some scientists, not all, but some scientists, even keep some legitimate findings from being published. I'll cover this while I can feel I say this with absolute confidence a little later in my book. If I'm honest about my study of this debate, I have to say that it's left me feeling an obligation, even a moral duty, to remind you, my readers, that not all statements of scientists are statements of science. In other words, science itself does not say anything. Only scientists do. As John Lennox said, it is scientists themselves that make all statements or interpretations about the data, and therefore their statements and interpretations do not, let me repeat, do not carry the authority of authentic science all the time, just because they're scientists expressing their personal interpretations and opinions. Many scientists tout the authority of science in their effort to make their interpretations appear as though they are superior to their opponents' interpretations. I'm speaking of opponents like myself, who's just one of billions who believe in God. Most of their claims are just hyperbolic interpretations. Here are more comments made by mathematician John Lennox from his book, God and Stephen Hawking, that I have intermixed with my thoughts as part of my introduction. I would encourage you, my readers and viewers, to go to YouTube and type in John Lennox into the search bar, or at least write that down so you can go back to it, into the search bar, and check out his many debates with Richard Dawkins and other atheists like him. He has a fun personality, and I think you will enjoy watching him debate these so-called atheist intellectuals. I promise that you'll find your view of this topic expanded because of what you learn from John's many experiences and his lengthy, intensive studies that has brought him to his current beliefs and perspective of God. Anyway, here is John's quote. God is very much on the agenda these days. Scientists have made sure of it by publishing book after book with titles like Francis Collins' The Language of God, Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, Victor Stenger's God the Failed Hypothesis, and Robert Winston's The Story of God, and so on. The fact remains that people want to hear what these scientists have to say. Most of the above-mentioned books have been runaway bestsellers, and now, in 2023, science has accumulated an immense culture and intellectual authority within our sophisticated modern psyche. One of the reasons for this societal phenomena is the fact that the purveyors of science have been phenomenally successful in developing technologies that have benefited humanity throughout the entire world, end quote. Just as Mr. Lennox suggested, today's scientists are giving us continually increasing insight into the wonders of the universe and our reality, as far as we understand it, both at the macro world level and the micro world level. Since its launch into space back in December of 2021, the James Webb Telescope is expanding our cosmological understanding far beyond what it was at the time of its launch. In fact, it's already making some physicists question whether the Big Bang even happened. There's a lot of footnotes you can check on that. And so, people have many reasons for turning to the scientists of today, and in particular to hear what they have to say about the big questions, those big questions of our existence. Those questions being, why are we here? What is the purpose of life if there is any? Where are we going after we die? Or do we just stop existing after death? I call that become a dirt pile. Is this universe all that exists, or is there more? And on the list goes. These big questions and others like them make us think about God, religion, and why we even exist. And so we ask, what's the purpose of the universe and why we're here on earth? We want to know what scientists have to say about God, whether or not there is any evidence for his existence, and why there's any existence before and after death. Some fear that there's nothing at all after death. Many of these bestsellers just mentioned are written by atheist scientists, but here's the important fact to remember. Not all scientists are atheists. Most atheists are saying that the number of theist scientists is declining. But even if this were true, and I'm not saying that it is, it does not negate the fact that there are still a great many of today's leading scientists who are believing award-winning theists. The question, are God and science at war, is as popular a question asked today by today's culture, but it would have been strongly opposed by one of the colossus of modern science, Sir Isaac Newton. Isaac was without parallel in the history of science, in my view. Isaac's discoveries were at the very heart of the scientific revolution that took place during the 17th century. Newton's landmark work, Principia Mathematica, laid out a new understanding of the heavens and the earth. Newton saw science and faith as being one great whole. Amongst other things, Newton discovered the laws of gravitation during the philosophical revolution of the Enlightenment. This discovery transformed the way we see the world. It is also important to note that Newton, besides being a brilliant scientist that he was also a devout Christian with a deep interest in theology and the Holy Bible. In his Principia Mathematica work, Newton said, quote, "Science cannot explain who set the planets in motion, for God governs all things." End quote. Newton saw science as a garden that God wanted him to cultivate, and saw many of his pioneering discoveries as coming from the inspiration of the Holy Ghost. Way to go, Newton. He saw an intelligent designer behind the order of the universe sustaining creation, and he described atheism as senseless. This most beautiful system of sun, planets, and comets, Newton said, could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. This being governs all things, not as the soul of the world, but as the Lord over all, and on account of his dominion, he is wont to be called Lord God. End quote. I'm going to close off here pretty soon. Another atheist I want to mention is Nikola Tesla, a Serbian-American inventor who lived from 1856 to 1945. Tesla was a pioneer in the field of electricity, radio, and X-rays. Nikola's inventions varied from the AC electricity supply system to the first remote-controlled boat that the military wanted to use as a weapon of war. Tesla invented more than 126 inventions, and he said of those inventions that, quote, "they came onto the screen of his mind as thoughts, each one being images with great detail," end quote. He said he would work to develop and improve them while they were still in his mind. On January 30th of 1926, Tesla even spoke about the concept of wireless communications during an interview for Collier's magazine, where he said, quote, "When wireless is perfectly applied to the whole earth will be converted into a huge brain, which in fact it is, all things being particles of a real and rhythmic whole. We shall be able to communicate with one another instantly," he said, irrespective of distance. Isn't that incredible? Tesla also described cell phone technology back in 1926, saying, quote, "Through television and telephony we shall see and hear one another as perfectly as though we were face to face, despite intervening distance of thousands of miles, and the instruments through which we shall be able to do this will fit into our vest pocket." What an incredible futurist mind Tesla had. This was 96 years ago. In the same interview with Collins magazine, Tesla said that he saw these thought visions of inventions in such detail that he often didn't need to draw them out or write them down. Tesla's vision and prediction of data transmission without wires came through nearly a century later, when the internet and cell phones became a reality. They've blessed the entire population of the world. Tesla was also an archpriest of the Greek Orthodox Church. But when asked if he believed in God, he said, "In my heart, I am deeply religious, though not in the Orthodox sense of that word." To expand on this, Tesla went on to say in his Collier's magazine interview, "The gift of mental energy comes from God, the Supreme Being. And if we concentrate our thoughts on this truth, we get into harmony," I call that attunement, "with this great power." These examples alone tell me that we shouldn't write off the debate as being resolved by so-called settled science, like atheist scientists would have us do. John Lennox said, "Most atheist scientists today say that the debate in question is a clash between science and religion. And it's true that the conflicting interpretations and opinions offered up by both sides regarding God's existence have heightened of late, but let me give an example of why I say the debate is not between science and religion. It's between atheism and theism. I'm beyond that time, so I'm going to close this off and just have you know I'm going to do the next one. We'll pick up where I am here. But whatever topics or thoughts came to you, whatever questions you have that you want a little more insight into, why I came up with this, why I searched out that, what these men were actually experiencing when they got these visions, this information, this quote-unquote light and intelligence right into their mind and felt in their heart. We'll talk about that. But until then, I wish you all continued success. Bye.